I will kickstart the session now by welcoming and introducing today's speaker, Mr. Keshav Vasudevan, who is an accomplished product leader with a remarkable track record of transforming numerous SaaS technology ventures from mere concepts to multi-million-dollar success stories. Presently, he spearheads the product management division of Prepared 911, a pioneering technology company dedicated to equipping 911 dispatchers and first aid responders with unprecedented emergency data to make a life-saving impact. Pleased to welcome you today, Keshav.
Yeah, nice to meet everyone here, and I'm really excited to be presenting today.
I'm handing over this session to you.
Awesome. I think I cannot start my video and so on because you've disabled the screen.
Oh yeah, I cannot see your video, unfortunately.
Yeah, it says you can't start the video because the host has stopped it.
Okay, let me just... I think you should be able to do it now.
Give me 1 second. Let me check. Awesome. Can you all see me?
Awesome. That's great. Good to see you, literally.
Likewise. Let me begin. Can I share my screen?
Yes, I will. I think you should be able to do that too.
Awesome. Let me try that as well. All right. Do you all see my screen?
Yeah. Awesome.
Awesome. Hey, folks, I'm very excited to be presenting today for all of you all. This is a topic that is very close to my heart, which is finding the right SaaS packaging and pricing. Quick introductions about who I am very quickly is Keshav. I've been working in products since 2015, and fortunately, I've been very fortunate to have worked in some really great companies and with some really good teams in order to build and develop products, all from ideas from on a blackboard all the way to to market, to scale, and eventually good success stories. And some of my notable projects that I've been I played a key product role in includes technologies like Swagger. If anyone's in the dev tech space, you may have come across the Swagger API framework. I was involved in the monetization of the open source Swagger framework into this product called Swagger Hub when I was at SmartBear. And now that's a pretty successful SaaS product. Same with something called Load Ninja, where yeah, I see a message in the comments here. Yeah, exactly. It's the API framework. And we built an enterprise product called Swagger Hub that's also used by thousands of companies now. And that was our part to monetizing an open source framework, which is, as you all probably know, monetization of open source technologies is incredibly difficult. I also was involved in this product called Load Ninja, which was a SaaS-based performance testing product. Again, being the lead product manager to take it from an idea to a multi-million-dollar venture. And finally, now I'm leading the product management department of this company called Prepared. It's backed by some incredible venture investors, including Google, including M13, First Round, etc. And we are providing life-saving technology to the masses in the United States by allowing any 911 dispatcher you can imagine during an emergency. A 911 dispatcher can connect to a caller in real time, and with the caller's consent, collect life-saving information like photos, videos, the GPS location of the caller, and send that off to the policemen or the fire folks or the EMS people in order to, give them additional information so that they can have the right context in order to maximize the ability to save someone's life. And we're growing pretty rapidly right now too. We are now in 12% of the United States. So it's a pretty exciting time to be working on a product that truly impacts millions of people in a way in which we can actually like positively save their lives potentially. So those are some of the big projects I've been involved in. And if you want to learn more about me, like feel free to connect with me on Twitter. I'm not too active, I used to be, but feel free to connect with me on Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I have my website here too, but whatever is convenient, I'd love to like have conversations with fellow PMs or aspiring PMs. Without further ado, let's begin. The agenda is very straightforward. What I want to do in this presentation is to talk through how do you think about pricing, right? Like pricing is one of those like abstract, ambiguous, very muddy, murky topic that is just like very hard to potentially like navigate around. It can be it can involve a lot of absurdity. And my hope is to, by the end of this session, you have a philosophy or a framework to think about pricing, but not just think about pricing, that when you go back to your company, you can potentially be the expert in how to navigate that pricing conversations and spearhead pricing committees. The way I want to do that is to articulate different models. And specific to this conversation, I want to focus on specifically SaaS-based products. So not B2C or anything else, like focus on B2B SaaS products. Hopefully this also informs other models, but just so that we are setting the context here, pricing models in the SaaS world is something which I'm going to be speaking at length about. So we're going to be talking about different models here. We're going to be trying to quantify value. How do you actually quantify value? How do you find the right pricing value metric, which I'll explain what that means as we go to that specific slide. And then from there, how to think about pricing, packaging, etc. And then we'll try to close this session with a summary and then maybe a discussion if time permits. All right. All right, so this is, I just wanted to put this slide. This is like a dictionary-based definition of what exactly is price. But for me, when I think of price, I think of it as like something that reflects the perceived value of a product or service. Price is, it's something that we in our human brains use to quantify the value. So it's essentially like, we subconsciously or consciously consider various factors like quality, value, utility of the product, the scarcity of the product, the brand reputation, and also like the market demand, and we take all those factors into account when making pricing decisions, both as consumers as well as potentially people who are setting the price in companies. And there's a price component to it, and then you also have the packaging component to it to make sure that the pricing that you have is wrapped up really well and is shown to the customers in a way that makes sense for them. So why should you care about pricing as a PM? Right? In product, like typically, if you look at most of the literature online, a lot of people will just talk about pricing as like, when a lot of people will think about product managers, not necessarily as pricing specialists, but they'll think of like, oh, you're managing the backlog, you're thinking about a roadmap, maybe you're setting the vision of the company for the product line. But pricing is not really thought much about. I think pricing is one of those key things that you as a product manager should be thinking about, because your entire job as a PM is to be providing that business perspective to the engineering organization. You are in some ways the bridge between what the market wants and what the company can deliver. And what the market wants is a function of the distribution model that your company decides to adopt. And the business model and the pricing is a key part of how the market is going to realize the value that your company is going to be delivering for them. So you need to be thinking about price, because you can build the best goddamn product, but if you're overpricing it or even underpricing it, something's going to go kaput. And I'll show you some metrics to validate this. And eventually, as your product reaches a certain scale, businesses around the world, products around the world are measured on certain key fundamental business metrics. Some of the basic ones are like gross revenue, operating margin, lifetime value, and churn. And for all of these metrics, price is the one thing that like impacts it one-to-one, right? You can have a very great product, a great marketing team, great sales team, but price is the one that's like ultimately going to be in some ways the deciding factor for a lot of people. So you have that one-to-one relationship between all those different business metrics that you as a PM should be thinking about, and how price can be a growth lever to impact all of them. And this is a way for you to level up your career. Not a lot of people are experts in pricing. So if you are able to like explain to your CEO or to the board, to the executive team, or whoever is above you or laterally about how to think about pricing, it helps the company make more informed decisions. And it could be a way for you to be, seen as a perceived leader in your specific space as it relates to pricing too. So why should you care about price as in a company? So we've seen there's multiple market data to say that price is actually like 2x more as efficient as it would be to improve retention for your product. And retention is an incredibly difficult thing to do. So you can imagine if you set a good price, that actually has a direct impact to improving retention. There's also data points to support that it's 4x as efficient as it would be to improve acquisition. Acquisition, again, is like one of those really difficult problems that any business will have. And I say acquisition, I mean customer acquisition. It's incredibly difficult to be acquiring new customers. They say that pricing through a lot of data points and research could be as 4x as efficient as improving acquisition. But if you think about the flip side of it, companies don't spend much time on pricing strategy. It's actually like one of the sad realities, which is just because of how muddy and murky it can be, not a lot of companies actually spend much time thinking about pricing. In fact, it just seems like on average, it's about 6 hours. And maybe in your companies, the attendees of this session may differ. I'd love to hear from you guys, like how much time you all spend on pricing. Like, is it something that there's a specific committee for? Is it something that is just like, the whim of an executive? But it'd be intriguing for me to see how other different companies also think about this. And there's other data points as well too. Like if you look at data, this is from First Round from 2017, and they say that founders who struggle to raise capital for their startups, they are 3x. They will say that they were 3x more likely to say that they monetize too late, that they picked the incorrect business model, and 40% of them again felt like they had a really high burn rate. All of these three things is a function of good pricing and good packaging. So the impact of like picking a poor pricing model and a poor packaging model could be pretty substantial for your SaaS business. And on the flip side, if you think about like really successful business, and I'm not talking about the startup world where there's a focus on user acquisition and less of like customer, good unit economics, at least for this specific slide. But eventually, as your businesses scale, you want to have a good lifetime value to customer acquisition cost ratio. And ideally that ratio is greater than 1. When you think about lifetime value, there's the formula that I typically use is the average monthly recurring revenue or average revenue over a period of time divided by churn. And that tells you on average, what is the amount of revenue a customer can provide to your company through the length of their subscription period, divided by the churn rate will give you that lifetime value. That lifetime value should ideally be greater than your customer acquisition cost ratio. And this is a metric that a lot of companies will try to optimize around, right? All the way from the seed stage company to like, your like public companies, your investors or your shareholders will be thinking about this metric. How do you actually is the burn rate too high? Is it too low? Is there a likelihood that the customer will actually be subscribed to your product for an incredibly long period of time so that we can maximize the business value that they provide for us in exchange for the product value that we are providing for them? Now, and this is just, visualizing what I just mentioned to you. Ideally, you want to increase your customer lifetime value and you want to decrease your customer acquisition cost over time. There's a whole conversation we can have about how to decrease customer acquisition costs. There's like product-led growth tactics, network effect models, and then there's a lot of like, sales tactics, marketing tactics, and so on. And ideally, you want to achieve a sense of virality where like, your customers become your biggest advocates. And then as that happens, your lifetime value of the customer should also go up. So this way, the fundamentals of your entire product business is in the right direction. Even if like you're a startup, if this ratio is off, if it's less than 1, that's totally fine, as long as you have a path, either now or for the future, to make that ratio, greater than 1. And if you do pricing right, and this is an example of like potentially something that makes sense to the market. This is an example from Zoom, and I've taken the US pricing slides here, pricing and packaging from the US market. But if you do things right, if you as a PM have done your job to set good pricing and packaging, what will end up happening is, if I have to take Zoom, for example, Zoom, you can see here, has a clear value metric that's easy to understand. What's the value metric here? It is user-based pricing, right? Something standard, like in SaaS, like a lot of companies have started to adopt user-based pricing. But here you can see Zoom, it's very clear. It's like per user pricing that they offer. And they say it's like annually, it's like about $150. They also align the package to the segment that cares about them. So what I mean by that is, look at this, like here they say, this is the business plus, this is business. If you are an individual consumer, you will very clearly see that this is for the businesses, it's not for you. So it's like they are very cognizant of aligning the packaging that they have to the person who might care about that specific package. And you can toggle in the Zoom pricing page to switch from business to personal. And they're very confident about saying, hey, we know our personal user, or like our individual users, this is what they care about. On the business side, this is what our business users care about. And then finally, at the end of the day, they seem to have price points that represent value that the customers are willing to pay for. And this is reflected by the growth that the company has had. Whether or not this is the right pricing, it seems like it is the right thing, but ultimately at the end of the day, that's your job as the PM, is to figure out what is the right value metric, what is the right packaging, and what is the willingness to pay for each package that resonates with the segment that might care about that package the most. So on this front, let's actually talk about the different pricing techniques itself, or the different ways in which we have seen companies adopt different pricing models and pricing structures and so on. So the most common thing you'll see, and again, like I'd love to hear from the audience members what how they think about this, is the most common model would be pricing based on costs. So they will, you'll take a SaaS business, or this is pretty standard in manufacturing businesses, for example, potentially too, where like you'll take the price based on the total number of costs that it would take to produce said good. So it could be the cost of a manufactured good. It could be the cost of, let's say, building and delivering a SaaS product. And they'll just put a markup on top of that. And it's typically a pretty common method of obtaining price to this day. So, let's take, for example, you're building a SaaS product and you know that there's certain costs to deliver certain services. So let's say this product works on AWS, it includes all these different services, and you run it for a few months, and you can say, okay, this is the cost it takes to use this product, to deliver this product for this amount of customers. On average, let's say per customer, this is the cost. And then you say, okay, now let's add a markup to it. Let's say it's like, we want profit margin to be 85, 95, 100%. And then you put a price to it. That is typically like a way to do this. And there's pros and cons to this, right? Pros is it's incredibly simple and easy to implement. And that, at least in that given moment in time, your costs are recovered. That, hey, if I'm putting a margin and if the customer is willing to pay for this, great. Like I'm going to recover these costs, and I can justify to my stakeholders, at least in the short term, that this works. And then that brings me to my third point, which is it is easy to explain internally. If someone tells you, how did you get this price? You can say, well, the cost for doing it is X. Now this is Y, this is the price, and this is how I got to the price. The cons, however, is there's a lot of money left on the table for the value you create. And this is something that is incredibly important for you to be thinking about as, let's say, the business owner of a specific product line, as you grow your career, where you're accountable for the profit and losses for that specific product line too. You want to make sure that you don't leave money on the table, especially if there's a lot of value to be delivered. The second thing is, like in SaaS models, especially, sometimes you can start to see that, economies of scale will start to show up, meaning, for a set amount of cost, you can start to deliver dramatically exponential value for a lot of different customers. And as a result, like if you just use cost-based pricing, you might be underpricing yourself potentially, given the amount of value you create. And then the last thing over here is costs fluctuate all the time. And you see this, especially, as the company grows, product grows, like you're seeing this right now with every day, there's a new technological framework that comes in. Every day, there's a new cool service that you could be using in your product, and your costs will keep fluctuating. Suddenly, there'll be like an increased demand for load. You may auto scale up your EC2 instances. That'll increase your costs. Then someday you'll have to do a pen testing service, and that'll increase your costs for to get compliance with a certain framework. Costs will just keep fluctuating. And so in a growing company, that's just going to be incredibly difficult for you to manage, and it'll just keep going on and on and on. And this is an example of how potentially the cost could be fluctuating for you. So take, for example, the blue graph here is the cost for say said service. And let's say the revenue in that 7 to 8 month period, let's say, is the same. Like you're not going to keep changing pricing, let's say every 7-8 months, right? Or every 2-3 months. So for that 7-month period, the revenue is almost exactly the same per package, but the costs keep changing. So you can start to see the impact on the margins itself, assuming you're going with this margin markup based pricing model. So it's not necessarily the most effective business savvy way to price. There is that said, there are businesses where this cost-based pricing works. Some businesses where I've been a part of, for example, where let's say it's a platform as a service business where the cost to just maintain and deliver your service is exponential. So you just have to take that into account. It's not economies of scale, typical SaaS-based models. So this is more platform as a service, PaaS-based models here. There could be services, for example, where you're relying on a third-party API, and the cost to work with that API is just high. And so as a result, you just have to have a pass-through model where you say, hey, this is an add-on. The cost for us is X. And as a result, customers can subscribe to this add-on with X plus Y. You see that a lot with OpenAI now being adopted. You'll see a lot of companies have a dedicated add-on or a tier. I see Notion do this, where you can add this AI tier at an additional cost that is typically going to be a cost based on the price it takes to integrate with OpenAI's API. So there are ways in which this cost-based model would work, but it should not be. Ideally, you should try your best to have a foundational value-based approach. The second pricing model that we start to see a lot of is pricing based on competition. So this is something which, again, what people will do is let's say, you're releasing a new product, you're going to be doing some competitive analysis. You'll say, okay, there's 5 to 8 big competitors in this space. This is kind of how they're pricing it. Let me just put, based on these benchmarks, at a quick glance, I think my product's pricing is somewhere over here, and then let's just put it out there and see what happens, right? And this is purely based on the competitive landscape and how the competitors are thinking about pricing. Again, this is very simple to implement, and it adds to your overall competitive intel, right? As you build the product and as you do market research, you're now getting price, and it ultimately benefits the company to add to that competitive intel that you gather based on all your research and so on. And it kind of puts your SaaS product in the right ballpark, at least in the short term, right? If let's say you're delivering a project management service similar to Jira, Jira's price, ClickUp's price, Notion's price. I don't know, there's Monday.com, every day there's a new project management tool that I uncover. But as you do this research and all these prices, you can say, well, my product fits here in this project management space, and it puts you in the right ballpark. So a prospect who lands on your pricing page is not going to be thrown off because he or she might be like, yeah, I've seen this similar pricing before, so this might make sense as well. The cons of this, though, is like you're fully dependent on your competitor strategy and value. And as a result, you're kind of putting, again, money on the table. You want to escape competition. Here, however, you're completely dependent on your competitor strategy and value. And a lot of disruptive technologies in some ways have radically different business models that the competition never even had. And still they were able to succeed because of the value they provide. And that is something which is important to understand, because ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to deliver products that take into account your customer value and scales exponentially as you deliver value for them, because the margins, the revenue, all of that is important for us to consider here. Quick note, though, there are businesses where pricing based on competition makes sense. An example is like, you typically see this in highly competitive markets with a lot of saturated products. Just go to your local grocery store or supermarket. The detergents that you purchase, like the cookies, biscuits, whatever you want to purchase there, those are all saturated markets where like salt, for example, how much, at the end of the day, how much additional value can you provide with your salt? There's a certain competitive benchmark that might hurt your business if you go beyond. So competitive markets, I have seen it makes sense to have a lot of competitive benchmarks, and it makes sense to price based on those benchmarks. One more caveat I want to mention here is what I'm getting at here is to not say, don't take competitive pricing into account. You do want to do that research. You do want to see where your product's pricing fits in with the competition. However, it should not be the main benchmark to price your product. It should be something that you take into account to inform your pricing. I see an open question really quickly before I go on to the next slide, which is cost is an investment. So pricing with respect to the cost won't work. Absolutely, I completely agree. It is an investment and it's sunk cost in some ways too. And that sunk cost will just keep growing and growing as you grow your team, as you grow your product line, and just keeping tabs of all of those things. You'll have a new office, you'll have new AWS services or Google Cloud service or whatever new cool shiny object that you have. So pricing just based on that, it just won't work in the short term and the long term. So my perspective is to try your best to price based on the value that is being delivered to the target market. So what that means is you have to figure out what the segments of the market that your product is going after, how much are they willing to pay for your product or service? And there's a lot of pros here. It focuses on the customer value, which again, as you as the product manager are accountable for. You fundamentally are accountable for making sure the ship is sailing in the right direction. And the North Star is maximizing customer value in such a way that it minimizes the time it takes for them to do a certain job, reduces cost, reduces effort, improves efficiency, reduces risk, whatever those key value-based outcomes are that your product is going for, you want to maximize on that. And so it focuses on that customer value and it builds out on your universal selling point. If you know you have a key niche, it helps you maximize that, and it helps you signal to the market that this is our niche, this is why we're better than our existing products, and this is why we're pricing based on that. If you do value-based pricing right, it also accounts for willingness to pay, which is what the market is willing to pay for that exponential value you're delivering. And again, I'm assuming that every product person I'm talking to right now wants to deliver products that are fundamentally better than the competition, that are fundamentally changing the customers' lives in a way that that improves on outcomes that they deeply care about. So taking into account what the customer is willing to pay for those outcomes becomes incredibly important. And then finally, doing value-based pricing research helps you inform packaging. And I'll show you in a second, or like in a few slides at least, what that means. But there's cons too. It takes time and takes effort. It does take time. It requires you to do some customer discovery, have a set of accounts you can go for, I have like really difficult discussions on pricing. Why I say difficult is one of my ex-bosses used to tell me, which is if you're doing pricing research and pricing discovery and you don't feel uncomfortable doing it with your customer or your prospect when you're gathering this data, you're doing something wrong, right? Because you're asking them, hey, what is it that you're willing to pay for this? It's having those really, like almost like uncomfortable discussions, which sometimes PMs will shy away from. They're like, oh, that's the salesperson's job. No, like finding pricing and determining that willingness to pay is in a lot of ways your job. And a question I received, how to determine what price to fix, that is, we will cover that in subsequent slides about like how to actually quantify value here. So, I feel please ask me further questions as I go into those slides, but my hope is to cover that as well. So let's actually talk about pricing built for businesses of all sizes, from all these different companies here. These are just examples of, if you do good research, you could get to an outcome where like you can take into account what the ideal value metric is. So this is Stripe. Their value metric is for every transaction, right? And they're like similar to Razorpay, all these other like fintech companies. Then you have typical SaaS companies like Confluence or Product Board, where they charge per user. And so there's like different ways in which you can figure out what that value metric is and then what that price point could be. So let's go into like the nitty-gritties of how to think about value-based pricing. How do you actually do it? My approach is a three-pronged approach. First step is you identify the pricing metric or the value metric. What is that value metric, which is, per user, per transaction, per widgets, per groups, per whatever. In AWS's case, it's per compute. There's like so many different ways in which you can think of value metric. How do you identify that? Step two, how do you quantify willingness to pay? And then step three, craft packaging based on all of this data. So this is my three-pronged approach to doing this. Question is asked like, how and when can we modify the pricing structure? I would recommend, and towards the end, we can discuss this. I would recommend having a pricing committee that looks at your pricing model and makes recommendations every 6 or 7 months. And that pricing committee should be steered by, in my opinion, a product manager, product leader. There's someone from sales, there's a representative from marketing, and the CEO or someone from the executive team is also involved, and they're looking at pricing based on what the market is telling them, what their HubSpot or like CRM data is telling them, what the sales team is telling them, and ultimately the product person steers the discussion and comes up with recommendation. There should be a leadership team accountable for like saying yes, no to the recommendations that the product person has said. Typically, I've seen either like a chief product officer at some point, or like the CEO being like the final yes, no person to do that. But that's how I would recommend is to create a pricing committee within your organization and have every 6 or 7 months, keep looking at pricing. And it is an incredibly important growth lever to have. So let's now talk about determining that pricing value metric. This is incredibly important, folks. And I want to stress the importance of finding that value metric. What I mean by value metric is that, I've shown you those slides. You've all seen those slides. Like, if you're using Spotify or using YouTube Premium or Netflix, you're pricing based on the number of users. That is their value metric. If you're using Google Cloud Services, let's say, there for them, maybe the value metric is the amount of data stored, amount of compute, amount of resources allocated for your different services. If you're using, let's say, a third-party API, that could be the number of calls. So that is the value metric, which is what are you pricing your product on? And this is incredibly important. A badly optimized value metric means that you're not capturing all the value your product represents for your users. It could increase the likelihood of churn. It could increase the likelihood of confusion in the market too, because your product is delivering value based on a certain dynamic, but then you're pricing it in a completely different way, and it just creates confusion. It becomes hard for the customer to budget for your product, and you just don't want to become like a badly priced product where there's just a lot of pricing confusion. Pricing should be elegant and simple, and that is my fundamental philosophy, which is a good value metric is easy to understand. it aligns with your customer's needs based on the product you're delivering, and it grows with your customer. You have to be very empathetic to your customer in the sense that when they look at your pricing, either it's on your website or your salesperson sends it to them as a quote, they see it within 20 seconds. It's like, yeah, I understand how you're pricing it. If they're like thinking like, oh man, what is this pricing? It's just so confusing. You're not doing them any service. You're just like increasing the sales cycle. They'll probably like talk to you again, send an email, they'll postpone it saying, I don't even know how to describe this. Let me table this. You should be very empathetic to your customer, and the money will flow from there. So this is my framework for a good value metric, is all these three things. And I'll give you a thought experiment of why a value metric is so important. You know AWS's pricing. Let's say this is AWS's EC2 pricing. And I put like random rough numbers here. Imagine like, they have 3 different types of machines: nano, medium, large, with different, as you go from nano has like lower compute resources, large has like higher compute resources. And so the price per hour goes up. Let's imagine AWS EC2 specifically didn't price by compute. Let's say they priced by user. Let's say they said, you know what, our value metric is user-based pricing. So the number of developers who have access to the AWS EC2 instance. If you do a quick math over here, this is kind of like roughly like you can see the money left on the table. This is user-based pricing here. So you can see as the company grows, as the amount of customers increase, the amount of users could go up, will go up, absolutely. But if you go with compute-based, which is clearly what the market is willing to pay for, and which is what the value is you're delivering as AWS, which is you're delivering elastic on-demand compute resources for your customers. Look at the revenue that you could be generating if you go with compute-based resources, which aligns with the willingness to pay. You have to make sure it aligns with what the market is willing to pay for. But this is, if you had gone with user-based pricing, this is the money that is left on the table here. So it's something for you to think about. The value metric is so important because it grows with the customer's needs, and it grows with the customer, generating massive business value for your company. So how do you determine the right pricing metric? My suggestions is this. This is the discovery framework I use. First, identify where your value lies. So a good PM, in my opinion, is just continuously doing discovery. So you want to identify, you want to have a thesis on where the value lies. So let's assume you're starting a new product, or like you've inherited a product and you're now accountable for pricing. Figure out, hey, this is my core product. These are all the features. What are like the 2-3 most important capabilities and outcomes that people use my product for? You think of Pareto's principle, which is 80% of users of your product only use your product for 20% of its features. Everything else is noise. So figure out what that 20% of features is, but more importantly, figure out what is the outcome they want. What is the job they're using your product for? Once you have that, have a thesis. What is your market value metrics could be? You have like different business models, different pricing, packaging, and so on, and have a few theses that you want to de-risk with more discovery. And then put it in front of customers. My opinion on this is there's 2 ways to put it in front of customers. If your product is incredibly easy to understand, put it in a survey and then send it out. I have seen typically in SaaS products, especially when you're starting out this discovery, it's better to talk to a customer face-to-face. So I'll show you how I do that, which is typically I will recruit 5, 10, 20 accounts to like do discovery with. Once I have a thesis, let's say, and I will do like a quick, either like a cart sorting exercise. So this is I just took an image from Google. So ignore all the features here, but think of like a cart sorting exercise as asking customers. You should give customers a list of features and you ask them, hey, customer, tell me, where does the value, like what is most important for you? What is like kind of medium important, and what is like not as important for you or like as valuable for you? And let them sort different features into different buckets. So you get a sense of where the value could be for them. And you could either have features here or you could have outcomes here. Once you have that, let's say you have a thesis, what I do is in a subsequent conversation, this is an example from one of my past companies' discovery conversations, where I will like put to the customer, hey customer, here's a package. Here's 2 packages for you now, based on the value that we think the market cares about. Here's like package number 1, package number 2. Now I'm going to be pricing it based on users, let's say. What do you think about that? Is that easy to understand? Is that difficult to understand? Then I'll ask them, okay, let's not say users. Let's do something else here. Let's say instead of users, I will say number of projects, number of accounts, or number of XYZ. So you give them different options and you ask them two questions. Question number one is, which one do you most prefer? And which one do you least prefer? And you give them those 3 to 4 options. Once you do that, you can get to, like, let's say a relative preference value. The formula that I use to calculate this is, let's say, storage-based pricing. 5 people, let's say they say, I find it to be least preferred, and only 0, and let's say 1 person said that they would find it to be most preferred. The formula would be most preferred minus least preferred divided by the total number of respondents, right? So in that case, you'll get to see that storage-based pricing is negative value, meaning negative preference, meaning the number of people who least prefer storage-based pricing is greater than the number of people who actually think it's the best pricing metric. And you can run different pricing metrics with different accounts, and eventually you can start to get this nice relative pricing preference metric. I like this visualization and this methodology versus asking people, tell me what do you prefer from most preferred to least preferred in terms of metric, because then you'll just get a random sort of different preference scales. You won't take into account what people don't want. In this case, you do. You ask them, what do you least prefer? By taking that into account, you can plot this visually in a way that makes sense for both you, for the market, as well as for your executive team. So you get a sense now from here, the value metric. What is that ideal value metric? What you should care about here, and how you should be thinking about the value metric based on the segments you care about. You can even do further segmentation, but I think the further segmentation is better to do in the subsequent quantification of value slides, which I'll talk about now in a second too, which is, once you have like a thesis, let's say now our thesis is user-based pricing is the most preferred, right? Clearly looking at this data. So now you have one step of this process. Now you're saying, okay, you know what, user-based pricing makes sense for us, and it makes sense from a business perspective. You can do some modeling to see how potentially your MRR could improve or decrease based on user-based pricing. Now you have to do the hard thing, which is, how do you determine the ideal price point? And you want to figure out, determine that optimal price point that maximizes revenue while still remaining attractive and competitive in the market. And willingness to pay is the price. You want to figure out who are the segments in the market that is most willing to pay for realizing your product's value. And the frameworks I typically use to quantify value is these 2 frameworks. I either use mostly I prefer using the Van Westendorp methodology, though in the past I have used the value quantification methodology too, and I'll explain what each of them mean. The Van Westendorp, there's a lot of literature online. I would highly recommend you guys read it. But what it does is it's named after the creator of this. I think he's an economist. His name is Peter Van Westendorp. And what he or she says is this is like a way to measure price sensitivity. So it provides insights into what that acceptable price range is, and what are the price points that both the customers care about, and what price points the customers don't care about when it comes to like making a potential purchase. And it takes into account that subjective perception of value and demand, because that is the abstract thing that customers might be willing to pay different things depending on the segment, depending on their persona characteristics, and so on. So it takes into account all of that when doing this research. And the optimal price point, I'll show you how to get to this optimal range, lies in this middle point. After doing this research, you'll get to something like this, and you'll start to see the optimal price range is somewhere here, which is the intersection of too cheap and these 2 lines over here. So it's the way to do this is asking 4 important questions. So the questions are, at what price would you consider the product to be so expensive that you would never consider buying it? Meaning it's like, I give you the product, let's say you use it for a few months and you like it, but if I give you like of this price, you will never consider purchasing it. It's just so absurdly high. The next question is, what is the price where you consider the product to be getting expensive, but it's not a price point that you would not consider buying it, but you will need more justification, maybe more conversation. So it's like, it's starting to get expensive. So it's on the expensive line, but it's not too expensive that you'd never consider purchasing. Then ask the inverse of those questions, which is, at what point, at what price would you consider the product to be so low priced that you would feel the quality is like crap? Like, and this is common in like, some product companies, competitive markets where like there's a high competition, that if you're given that product and you're just going to be like, wow, that's kind of like low price. And then finally, what is a good bargain for value, which is, it's cheap. It's considered good for me. It realizes the value, but it's not too cheap. So what is that good bargain for value here? The question is asked is, how do we get to these price points? So that's a good question. So here's how, and this is again, like live examples. I've taken like a small sample size of accounts that I have done this research for. So imagine like, typically I would recommend talking to at least 10 accounts. There's like this framework was created in 1976, I believe. And there's literature that says that you may want to do it in a survey and so on. By the end of this section, I will talk about the pros and cons of doing it via survey. My personal recommendation is, at least in the SaaS world, it's better to do it in a conversation. Unless your pricing and your product is so simple that someone can explain this framework to the customer in a survey, I would recommend doing it in a conversation. So imagine like there's like 6 companies here, 6-7 companies I spoke to. So this is a subset of all the companies I have spoken to, let's say, when I was doing the survey. And I show them, remember that package I showed you guys, like those 2 packages? Let's say I pick one package or like a set of packages that I know Acme, Bharatco, Awesome Sauce, all these companies care about. So let's say I choose the buyer, I reach out to them on email and I say, can you please talk to me for 30 minutes? I'd love your perspective. They're friendly. They say, yep, I'll talk to you. We'll give you some research insights on this. Get on a call with them. And I say, okay, here's the price. Here's the product. This is the value the product is. These are all the features. They'll say, this is the value. This is what I get. Yep. Makes sense. Then I ask them this question. Now you're in the buyer's shoes right now. Next year, I'm saying the price for this product is going to be X. And typically I start with a very high product, very high price. So in the case of, let's say the product I'm selling is Google Slides, I will say, hey, imagine now next year, the Google Slides price for your company is going to be $10,000. And I go pretty high, not too high, like $10 million, but like higher enough that I know the competition, it's a little on the expensive side on the competition side. And that will create a reaction in the customer. They will say, oh, that's too high. Or they may say, oh, that makes sense. But you want to start with the high price because you want to get them thinking about this and you want them to like have that reaction. And you ask them, well, with that price now, would you think this is a bargain for value? And they may say, yeah, it's like, no, man, it's like not a bargain for value. I think it's it's more on the expensive side, let's say. And then you ask them a further question, which is, oh, is it on the expensive side? Well, if it's on the expensive side, is it so expensive that you would never consider purchasing? Or is it expensive to the point where you'll need more justification, but you would consider purchasing it if you have that justification, maybe like some material, some case studies, whatever that is. So I'll answer this anonymous question about like different segmentation. So once we get to, let's say, they will tell you at that point, once we ask those questions, they will say, yeah, that makes sense. It's more on the expensive side, but it's not so expensive that I'd never consider purchasing. I might it'll just increase the sales cycle. So now okay, this price that you gave is probably on the expensive side, but it's not so expensive that they would never consider purchasing. And you can probe a little bit more. You can ask them, well, what's the price that you'd consider so expensive that you never consider purchasing? And they'll say, yeah, not 10,000, but if you give it 15,000, I'll just never consider purchasing. Now ask the reverse. Okay, well, you know the product, you've seen this product before. What is a bargain for value? Which is, I give you this product, I give you the price, and you're just like, this is a no-brainer. Here's my credit card, go run with it. This is my price. I'm ready to purchase. What's the price that comes to mind? And they will tell you an honest reaction. They'll say, yeah, that's the price that I think is the bargain for value. And you can probe a little bit more there. And then finally, you can ask them the last question, which is there a price point that comes to mind where the product, if I give you this product for, let's say, $10, would you question the quality of it? Would you be suspicious of it? And they may say, oh yeah, if you give it for me for $10, that's like, I mean, why? Most competitors, most people in this space would charge you at least $2,500. Why are you charging me only $10? I'll be suspicious of it. And you can probe a little bit more. At which point would you not be suspicious? It's like, what, $1,000, $800? So now you get like for let's say Bharat Co, you're able to get those 4 price points like this. And you do the same for all these other accounts. And ideally, I would recommend like 10 accounts. And again, Van Westendorp would recommend in the ideal world, like a lot more data points. And I'll show you how a lot more data points also looks like in an image here. Once you get to that, you essentially, this is Excel wizardry now. You take all of that and you convert to, let's say, the pricing metric. So remember in the previous slide, we know what that pricing metric was, which was user-based pricing. So we know all this, like the total value at which like things become so expensive. Now, convert that into user-based pricing, which is, the number of users in Acme, Bharat Co, Awesome Sauce, Great Ink, etc. Convert all of them into user-based pricing, what that user-based pricing could look like. And then from there, take it in an Excel sheet. And what you want to do is like create a column called frequency and paste all of the unique values into a single column in descending order. So what that means is, let's say, you convert into user-based pricing, it becomes, let's say, $30, $20 to $50 per month, etc. So all of that you convert here. Then you can paste all of that uniquely in such a way that you're taking into account just unique data points and put them in descending order. Once you do that, you calculate frequency. Frequency in this case is, the amount of times in which this, the amount of accounts or users here who say that this is too cheap, this is too expensive, this is expensive, this is on the cheap side, etc. So there's a formula for just calculating frequency, which is just frequency, pick this range, and then pick this range, and it'll tell you the frequency out of the box. Once you get a frequency, you want to then from here calculate the percentages of people who think that your product is that this price point is so cheap that they would never consider, they would question the quality of the product. And the people who think it's the bargain for value. The bargain for value is the cheap column here, which is the formula for this is just sum of column divided by total respondents, right? So in this case, it would be the sum of people who say, the 0 is like incredibly cheap divided by the total number of respondents here. And you start to see this frequency. How to interpret this frequency for let's say the cheap or too cheap columns is at $0, 100% of the people you spoke to say that it is so cheap that they would question the quality. At $3, it's still 100%. So 100% say that, sorry, I mistakenly spoke here. Let's take the too cheap column first. At $0, 100% say that it is so cheap that they would question the quality of the product. At $3, 50% say that it's so cheap that they would question the quality of the product. And you'll start to see that, at $10, only 25% say that it's so cheap that they would question the quality of the product. And then from here, it's all 0. The bargain for value interpreted the same way. Up to like $5, 100% of the market says that, or the people you spoke to say that it is cheap enough that they would consider paying it, and it is the bargain for value. It's like a no-brainer. But at 7, 10, and so on, the percentages goes down to the point where at $25, only 25% say that it's a bargain for value, meaning about 75%, which is coming here, think that it is on the expensive side. So once you get to the bargain for value column and the too cheap column, the next thing is to calculate the next thing, which is how expensive is it, which is third column, which is what is the price which is so expensive that you would consider purchasing, but you would require more justification. And finally, what's so expensive that you'd never consider purchasing. To get to this, you'll do the inverse of that same formula. So it's 1 minus sum of the column divided by total respondents. So it'll be like 1 minus the number of people who say this is very expensive divided by total number of respondents. In this case, it's 6 people. And you get this frequency graph here, and you get this frequency curve here. Why this is important for you in terms of like the inverse is, again, what is the implications of this when you talk about it? This is telling me that 0% of the people I spoke to say that $0 is so expensive that they would never consider purchasing, or that it is so expensive that they would need more justification. At $12, we see that 25% start to say that the product is so expensive that they would never consider purchasing. And then at $40, 75% says that it's so expensive they would never consider purchasing. So you start to see how you can interpret the different values now that you've gained through discovery into a real world scenario. Once you do this, you can plot this on this graph, which is just an Excel thing. Let's like literally just take this graph and say create graph. It'll just plot it out for you like this, where the x-axis is the dollar, the pricing that you have, and then y-axis is the frequency. And what Van Westendorp says is the point of marginal inexpensiveness, which is the place where like the too cheap, which is like the price point in which it's so cheap that they'd question the quality, and then the expensive product, which is the price point where things start to get expensive, but they would consider purchasing if they had more justification, if they had more time. Here, this point is called the point of marginal cheapness, or the point of marginal inexpensiveness. Here, many people think that the product is too cheap, but the percentage of people who think that it is so cheap is offset by the same amount of people who consider the product expensive but would consider purchasing. So anything lower than this price point will have a limited number of buyers. And as and at every unit you decrease the price, your price past this, you will lose customers. So here they'll start to question the quality a lot. So this is like, it starts with the point of like marginal inexpensiveness. The inverse of that is the marginal point of marginal expensiveness, which is where the price point where the bargain for money curve intersects, which is the cheap column here. And then the too expensive column, which is the price point in which things are so expensive that they would never consider purchasing. At this point, many people think that the product is too expensive, but these customers are offset by a similar percentage of people who consider the product to be a bargain. So anything greater than this will have a limited number of buyers. With every unit passed, you increase price over here, you'll have the negative ramifications of losing customers. So the ideal price point is somewhere in between here. Now, I have only shown you how this graph looks like with 6 accounts, and there's a reason for that. There was a question in the audience members, which is different segments of clients may find the product to be different segments of the product of the market may have different willingness to pay metrics for, as you do this Van Westendorp pricing analysis. And that is a great point, which is why it's only showing you 6 over here. What is not shown here in this column is I actually have another column here talking about some segmentation property. In my case, the segmentation property I used is, are they a small business? Are they a startup? Are they an enterprise company? And you can add that over here. And you can imagine now, let's say you talk to 15 accounts who give you this data. You can do this exact analysis, but segment it based on a property you think makes sense. So say, only show me the data for all accounts who are in the small business range. And it'll filter that out and then do the same analysis. And you'll get what this price range could look like for the small businesses that you're serving. This price range will change once it's an enterprise customer. This price range will change once it's, let's say, a growth stage company or you're servicing, if it's part of your target audience. So depending on the market you're serving, you can have different properties. If you're serving, let's say, I don't know, like an agri-tech product where you're selling to farmers, you can say, change this based on the population served. Or change it based on rural or urban farmer that you're selling. So whatever that market is you're doing, you can add a property column here, put a property that you think makes sense to segment your market on, and then just show the data for that specific property and then do this analysis. And you'll start to see that price sensitivity for those different segments. I hope that answers your question. And I'll talk about how to take this segmentation into account when you think about packaging. The next question was for new product B2B customers who are not willing to discuss these and any other challenges getting these data points. Are there any tips? So I have a very strong opinion about this, which is if you have a new product and you have customers who are not willing to engage in like customer discovery, helping you with like research on this front, that means you don't have a loyal customer base. And I say this with the utmost respect, which is, if you have a product that is compelling for your end users, they will love to like give you pricing insights. I have done this in 3 of the products I have managed very successfully, because people just love to give opinions. People love to talk. It's like our intrinsic human need to like expound on all the expertise that we subjectively feel we offer. A good discovery conversation is when you talk only 10% as the PM and 90% is just the customer talking. So you just ask them questions. And if you do that right, there's a way to do it. Again, like reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Happy to provide like some tips and tricks to like build out that continuous customer discovery pipeline. But my fundamental goal is like, your step 1 as a PM when you're starting a new product or like you're joining a new company is to build out that customer discovery pipeline. That is your leverage in that organization to be the voice of the customer. And there's good tips and tricks and techniques to help you with that as well. So coming to this point, if you talk to many customers, what you'll start to see is this is a data point where like, it's not very smooth, right? There's like clearly only like 6 to 7 data points here. If you talk to many accounts, you'll start to see a very smoothening of this curve. This is where the survey methodology makes a lot of sense, where you can have one survey that you can just send out to many accounts. The challenge I have run into, and I've tried surveys in the past, is it becomes very difficult to explain how the product should be perceived, the value, and so on. I personally really like just using a conversation, and just once you figure out that groove, it becomes very easy to have these conversations. Like every week you can have like 4 pricing conversations. And as the customer is telling you these data points, you just enter it into an Excel sheet. And then the model will just update over time. So that's a way for you to keep this model updated. But the advantage of the survey model is you can just get these data points very quickly. The cost of doing it in the survey thing is you might just get incorrect perceived value, because they may just not perceive the value or perceive the question you're asking the same way as you would want them to perceive here. All right. So now let's talk about another framework to think about quantifying value, which is the value quantification methodology. I've shown you using Van Westendorf, you can find that sensitivity range. You can also then from there start to figure out what that ideal price point could be, which is right in the middle there. Once you get this, you can further segment it into different markets and so on, and get the price sensitivity depending on different segments of the market that you care about. The other way you can do this is the value quantification methodology, where you look at your product, start to work with a few accounts that you know are good friendlies for you, right? And almost like start to see what is the value you're delivering and try to quantify that value. This is, let's say there's just 4 to 5 different ways in which you can think about value. Ultimately, does this product save time and effort? Let's take an example where like I use this product called Product Board as a PM, and Product Board allows me to take customer insights and attach it to different features, functionality that they care about. Prior to this, I was using like a very manual, like I used to use Jira in like 2017, 2018, and it didn't have that nice way to like take customer insights to my tickets. And that cost me like X amount of time. So if I was like the product person managing Product Board, I would come to me and I would say, hey, how much time and effort did we save? Let's work together to quantify that time and effort. And you get a sense of what that time and effort is. Another way to think about value is maybe the product replaces something that the customer has to manually build themselves. So that's something which you can think about too. Like, hey, you would otherwise have to manage this entire payment process on your own. Our product helps you do this seamlessly. You'd have to build this on your own. This is how much time it would have taken you to build it. This is how much our product does not allow you to build it, just is out of the box. Here's how much something that we save for you. The product reduces risk. Let's take, for example, what's a product that reduces risk here? Cybersecurity products. Let's say it's like, like in GitHub, you have code scanning tools like Dependabot and so on that'll statically scan your GitHub repos. and it'll say, okay, these are all your critical vulnerabilities. What is the risk associated with like not catching those critical vulnerabilities? Let's say the cost of the business is X, and you can look at other data points in the market to say critical vulnerabilities cost CVS Health $10,000 or cost Razorpay $25,000. Like you can quantify that and you can say this is how much risk we reduce. And then finally, does this product actually, when you use that product, to the customer uses the product, they generate revenue. An example of that is, let's say Shopify. You use the product, let's say you use it, it helps you generate X amount of revenue. Like, multi-level marketing products like Amway, you can say does that, right? Like you give Amway to an account, to a customer, and they say, hey, you go sell this Amway, it'll help you generate revenue. So that's like an example too. It's like the customer gets the product, they're able to generate revenue using your product for themselves. If you're able to quantify these things, and I gave you some examples, right, how to quantify different things, convert that into dollar amount or rupee amount. What that means is, let's say you find out how much time or effort you save, figure out which is the persona that you're saving that time for those 3 to 4 design partners or beta accounts that you're doing this research for. What is their hourly rate? Let's say try to find their annual salary, find it on that hourly perspective, how much time it is. And then that is for those 4 to 5 design partners in that specific segment you care about, that is your time you save. And you can do that that is the revenue impact for your product. And you can do that across all of them. And a good framework or methodology they recommend is, once you've quantified that, 20% of that revenue impact is your price for that specific package or feature. So what that means, let's say, is like you are able to, for a cybersecurity product that reduces risk in such a way that it, let's say you reduce risk by $50,000. So 20% of that $50,000 is your annual price. And then based on the pricing metric or value metric you determined in step number 1, you can say that's the price, but value metric is how we scale this exponentially over time. So you price it based on that value metric. So hopefully this is another methodology for you to use methodology to quantify what the value is that you deliver. I have used this in my own world, like this product I used to manage called Load Ninja. It was a SaaS-based performance testing product. We determined to a lot of early beta customers that there's a 60% reduction in time creating test scripts. And this test scripts is in the performance testing, functional testing world, the time it would take for a QA person to create this test. So based on that, we would say, okay, so this is the 60% time that we know. We converted that into some sort of like a revenue number or revenue impact number or cost impact number for the customer. And then we put a price point based on that. So that's an example where I have used the value quantification method on my own to create a price. I personally like the Van Westendorp analysis more, only because I think it's like easier to do in the long term. It's easier to like build that model, and it provides you, it takes into account that subjective perception of value that you create. This one here, like this methodology is easier to justify to the customer once you do it right. In this, when I say this methodology, I mean the value quantification methodology. Because imagine a salesperson talking to the customer, they can say, hey, our product saves you X amount. We've seen our research says that. We're just pricing with a small percentage of that. And it's easier to potentially create that justification. Though I would argue that with Van Westendorp too, you can create that justification. So I'm a big fan of Van Westendorp personally, but value quantification is something you can do too. Once you do all of this, you can start to put all of this into action. Here's a screenshot from a pricing research book that I read a while ago. You figured out your value metric. So you figured out that, hey, this is an example from AppQues, which is an onboarding tool. Their value metric is the number of monthly active users, and that scales as the value of the product grows. So here you can say, yep, my value metric is monthly active users, and you figured that out and you put that into your pricing. The next thing which you do is you figured out the demographics that these features resonate with, and you found this out based on, remember that step number 1 where we did the value metric analysis, where we asked different customers which features they care about the most, which features they care about the least, and then we asked them which value metric they care about the most, which value metrics they care about the least. So it'll give you a sense of, if you put that segmentation spin to it, let's say it's the small businesses world, you can say, okay, this type of small business cares about these specific features, but if as you go into like growth mode, these types of companies, these types of customers care about this specific set of features. So you can start to create that segmentation based on that analysis that you did. And then finally, the willingness to pay in Van Westendorp or the value quantification methodology. Once you get to that data point, just filter out based on the property, the market segment property that you have segmented that data point, the data points for, and it'll give you now a good sense of the lay of the land. You can start to see, okay, small businesses, this is the features they care about on average. This is the price sensitivity, and this is possibly one way to package this. Growth size companies, these are the set of features they care about typically. Their price sensitivity is a lot lower, or like they're willing to pay a lot higher, and this is the package we could craft for them. And that's a way in which now you have a very informed strategy to inform you how you want to think about pricing and packaging. And ideally, this entire packaging is condensed into something that is easy to understand. Like clearly, if I'm a prospect, for example, I'm looking at this, I know, hey, I'm a startup. This is probably what I should care about. It clearly, like they've done the research to say, we know our segment so well that we know this package should resonate with the majority of startups. The value metric is very clear. It tells me, okay, monthly active users based on the number of users this product is analyzing, that's the price I have to pay. And it's very clear what that is. And then if they also tell you what that additional price point is. And then finally, clearly you see what the features are here. And the features are and you can see how the features are packaged in a way that could resonate with different segments they care about. Question here is, there can be cannibalization curve too. At what price point it would create what amount of cannibalization in Van Westendorp? I don't follow the question. Maybe one of the moderators can have that person ask that question live towards the end of the conversation, or like if you can clarify that, that'll be great. I'm not sure I follow that, Karthik. So let's go into, and yeah, if you can clarify that, that would be great. So I think this brings me to almost like the end of the conversation here, which is, and actually right before this, I will talk very briefly. I don't have a slide for this, but I will talk about my perspective on how you want to do this operationally as a PM. Is first, I think like you want to, in your company, be accountable for pricing. I don't know, again, how different companies may operate in, like, different companies may have, in a larger company, you may have a dedicated pricing team. My hope is a product person has a seat on that table. And they report to like the product organization. But typically I would have seen in most companies that the product person is accountable for like thinking about pricing, and they have to get buy-in from the chief financial officer, the CEO, the sales leaders, and so on. But it is an important pricing metric or pricing conversation that you should be a part of. The next thing over here, what I would recommend is think about like spearheading a pricing committee. In your company, a pricing committee could be consisting of the product person who steers the committee. There's the CEO is responsible for being part of that committee. Maybe he or she is the final decision maker. The sales leader, like whoever's accountable for like go-to-market, the marketing leader who's accountable for like the lead gen side of things, they all have a seat on that table. But the product manager is the one who makes the recommendation, and they get the input from the salesperson, the marketing person, et cetera, because you want their buy-in. And every 6 to 8 months, you're reviewing pricing and packaging based on the data that sales, marketing, product, customer success, renewals, they all collect. This is important because if you start the steering committee, you can have the respective leaders operationalize collecting good data. An example of that is, let's imagine you have 20 salespeople selling your product. They probably collect data on, hey, we lost 20 accounts or 10 accounts this month or this quarter because they said the price was too high, or they went with a competitor. That's data points for you. And you can now say, okay, maybe there's a set of, you can use that data so that when the next time you review pricing, you can have a clear sense of what, how you should be thinking about pricing, if you should lower the price, if you should keep it the same, if you should increase it, and so on. And you also have a set of accounts you can do further discovery with. So the accounts who were, let's say, close lost, you can go talk to them and say, yep, we understand we lost your account. Can you tell me a little bit more what your willingness to pay is? And you can ask them those same questions that I alluded to with the Van Westendorp framework. So, I spoke a lot. I hope this session was valuable. My quick summary for this conversation is, I would say, pricing, think of it as an untapped growth lever for your company and for your PM and for your career as a PM. It's a very muddy topic. If you do it right, you can help your company tremendously. And it is one of those metrics that directly impact the fundamentals of the business: operating margin, revenue, churn. Everything is, it has a one-to-one correlation with good pricing and good pricing strategy. Whenever possible, aspire for value-based pricing in SaaS platforms, unless you cannot do it. The places where you cannot do it, typically I've seen, is when the cost for delivering your goods is just so high that you have to take into account. And this could be in like APIs. When you're using third-party APIs, maybe there's like a specific partner that's like incredibly expensive to work with, those kinds of things. So if possible, aspire for value-based pricing, and then be very cognizant and be very focused on finding the right value metric. You want to find the right value metric in such a way that it resonates with the market, it grows with the value that you're delivering, and then it results in an increased MRR for your business. But it does not do it in such a way that it negatively impacts acquisition rate of new customers. And then finally, I'm a big proponent of the Van Westendorp analysis. You can also quantify. You can also use other frameworks as well, but I like quantifying value and providing my pricing steering committee a great way to like actually make good decisions versus making a subjective decision of, oh, I found this is the price, this is what it should be, go for it. Like, you want to have like a good framework, a good level-headed way of like thinking about pricing here. So this is kind of like, it brings me to the end of this discussion. I see 2 open questions. Karthik, as I mentioned, if you can clarify that will be great. Shruti asks a question, which is, if there's a separate department involved in pricing in the organization, as a PM, how can we have hands-on experience on pricing and packaging? That's a great question. Like, I would love to like understand in that separate department, is there a pricing person involved? Is there a product person involved? If there isn't any product person, like, that is something maybe you may want to, call out to your boss, or like if whoever like you can trust as a confidant. And just, my recommendation to always be in companies I have seen, if you're working with good people and they believe you can offer a good perspective that improves their business, and that makes them look good, I think they will try to accommodate you to at least be involved in seeing how the pricing is structured. So my recommendation would be, if there's any product person involved in that pricing department, someone who's at least, even if they're not involved in actively setting the price, a product person involved in giving that yes/no decision, or like who has a seat at the table to inform pricing, and see if like you can work with your boss to maybe learn from that person, maybe say, I'd love to understand how you think about pricing, have a conversation with them, and then see if you can be involved and at least like as a fly on the wall kind of person to just listen in, see how they're doing it and so on. And eventually from there, have that hands-on experience. That is like one approach. Happy to discuss this offline too. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to like, see how I can help you on that side.
Few more questions coming in. I see one in the chat too. Okay, no, that's just Shruti. Thanks you for clarifying. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. Karthik hasn't provided us any more clarity, so I guess we can. Okay, he's raised his hand. One second. Give me a second. Karthik, you should be able to unmute yourself and yeah.
Thank you so much. Keshav, first of all, great insight. I have got a lot of pointers to implement in my area. The point that I wanted to make is, I have seen in some of my products where we have done something called cannibalization, where you have price ranges, you have optimal price range, high, medium, low. and you can plot against data where it says at what price point, what would be the amount of cannibalization that it can create. And that's something that we derived out of Van Westentop only. So that's something that we did, and it worked. So it was more of a not a question, but an extension of what you explain.
When you say cannibalization, do you mean like, oh, there's a price point that is so expensive that they would consider purchasing another product your company offers?
Exactly. Yes.
Nice. That's interesting. Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. Like a lot of my experience has been in like smaller companies, I would say, with like less of like too many complementary or competing products. Though when I was at SmartBear, we did have like 2 performance testing products, 3 API products. But that point, I wasn't using Van Westendorp as much as I would like. But that's a great point. Thank you, Karthik, for saying that.
Thanks, Keshav. Keshav, I had a couple of questions based on my personal experience. So whenever I'm dealing with a B2B pricing, SaaS pricing, what happens from a survey data is we float out the survey questions to certain target customers. And most of the times it so happens that the decision makers and influencers is what we typically float those survey questions to. But what typically happens from that is the decision makers don't have insight into the product. Influencers don't know how much the decision maker has paid, or is the willingness to pay is kind of, they don't know the data. They don't know how much somebody has made a decision to buy the product. So in such a situation, the data that we get is not accurate. So how do we consider these data as more, what I would say is realistic or closer to what actually the price needs to be? So this is one challenge that I have faced. Any pointers, Keshav?
Yeah, good point. I'll tell you how I have consciously solved this. And maybe this is one approach. I'm sure there's like other approaches as well to figure this out. In the product I manage right now with Prepared 911, it's kind of similar, where like we have line level dispatchers who are using the product. You can call them influencers or so on. But then the ultimate buyer is the police chief. The police chief is like almost like 2 levels removed from, the day-to-days of the product. The 911 supervisor is the one who's like actively using the product, but this police chief is the one who actually makes that decision. The way I've done this, I've seen a couple of ways which has helped me. One is, so in our the influencers, in this case, it's the champions that we have, the dispatch supervisors. Even though they're not the ones who are finally like putting the signature on the paycheck, they influence the buying decision heavily. So the police chief will look to the supervisor to say, hey, is this product worth it? Should we get it to this 911 center? Yes or no? So they look to that person and they say, yep, yes or no, we should do it. So really having that great relationship with the 911 supervisor has helped me a lot, because I use them as a proxy for what that police chief would say. What I mean by that is, when I have these conversations, I typically, say, hey, listen, your budget, what the police chief cares about fundamentally. Use that as a lens, and you tell me now how these, when I ask them these questions, how this fits. And this is one more point when I mentioned to the point I mentioned, which is asking this in a survey is just incredibly difficult, in my opinion. Right. You lose out on all those like questions that they may have, insights that they may offer. And I know it's time consuming to do this on an actual call. And the flip side is, you won't get as many data points as a survey would, but even 10 data points of like rich data, in my opinion, is very, very valuable. Than like, let's say 50 accounts where you have 50 data points where you get a smooth curve, but you kind of like don't even know if you can trust that data. So doing that face-to-face and ask and almost like telling them upfront, please be a proxy for what your police chief or like your ultimate buyer would be thinking about this. And let's have this discussion. So having that discussion helps. The second thing which I've seen helping me a lot is we do in our product, we've done a decent job of like doing these like in-product NPS surveys. And when I say in-product NPS, I don't mean this usual question that people ask, which is on a scale of 0 to 10, tell me how likely you would be to recommend the product. I hate that question personally, because it's such an absurd question. The question I like is, every 3 months, we show to our individual users in the product in a nice way, how likely would you be to if the product didn't exist, if you couldn't use the product, how disappointed would you be? Would you be very disappointed? Would you be somewhat disappointed? Would you be not disappointed at all? And they say that if you get at least 40% of your target market saying they'd be very disappointed if they could no longer use your product, that means you've achieved product market fit. So why I say this is I usually have this data with me because I know for every account, what's their individual users telling me. And I'll go to these pricing conversations saying, by the way, 65% of your users tell me that they'd be very disappointed if they don't use these features. That's just some context for you so that you can have these discussions with me and give me the optimal research-based responses here. So those are like some ways where you go. So to summarize, I'll get off my soapbox in a second. Summarize, I would highly recommend face-to-face conversations, unless you're so confident that you can abstract that in a survey. Face-to-face conversations better. Put whoever your champion is or the person you have a good relationship with, ideally they should be the person who's either like the buyer or influencing the buying decision heavily. And if it's the person who's influencing the buying decision heavily, request them to act as a proxy for the ultimate buyer and force them to be like, think about it from the buyer's perspective when you're having these discussions. And 3, arm yourselves with additional data points for that account. If you have a good analytics tool like Mixpanel, Amplitude, whatever, you'll get all of those data points. I'd recommend that survey I mentioned too. So you can have that additional arsenal to say, by the way, 60% of your users use this X feature a lot. They say they love it. So you have those data points as well to help the person responding to your questions answer well.
Cool. Thanks, Keshav. Another challenge that I've seen is I work for the product that I oversee is a global product. So the pricing that has been done is more of a US based pricing. How do you extend it to other geographies? So it cannot be a currency conversion. So how do you do a pricing survey for other geographies? So any tips on that, Keshav?
Yeah, I mean, you need to get buy-in from that top level management, whoever is making the decision. And this is the big challenge with some of these US based companies is like, the pricing is set to optimize in some ways the revenue. And because the United States is a large consumer market, it's like fully optimized for the US market, and it doesn't take into account the price sensitivity for all these other markets. Like
exactly,
it's like pretty. So I don't know who's setting the pricing in your organization, but I almost wonder, like, before you do that price sensitivity analysis, you can get that price sensitivity, but the minute, let's say, you show a lower price in the Indian market, and you can plot saying, but we can show X amount of users and so on. The minute it seems like the amount of revenue would be lower than before the pricing change that you're recommending. Immediately they'll be like, I don't know, man, like I don't think this might work out, because they're incentivized to maximize revenue. So you may want to like figure out whoever's making those pricing decisions, what their selfish motive is, what is their incentive here, what is the outcome they care about, and get that buy-in first before doing this extensive research. And think that's like one approach I would recommend. I remember because I've had that similar case where, like, you build a product, you put it in this US market, and then when you're expanding to EMEA, expanding to India, which is huge huge markets that there's a lot of people willing to pay, people will just be unwilling to lower the price because they're so worried about that bottom line revenue. So you need to get that buy-in first.
Right. I think Netflix is one example where it backfired when they launched it in India with the price that they did in US.
I mean, so many companies, I remember like, even like, basic consumer products like video games, they'd like price it so high. Now I think like things have changed in India. But like, I remember like, buying video games would be like so expensive. Like, why is it so expensive? And then I remember Sony actually doing like putting the right price point. And I was like, now I'll buy original video games.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would like to have more discussions, Keshav, but I think probably in the interest of time, probably I'll connect with you on LinkedIn. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you.